Greetings. Welcome to another question and answer session brought to you by Path of the Just Ministries. Tonight's question is coming from Reinet Thornhill. Hi, Sister Thornhill. What do you think about the lunar solar calendar teaching? Do we worship on the wrong Sabbath day? And I simply say no, we worship on the correct day according to the commandment, according to the seventh day, based upon creation week that the Creator set up. But there are those that say that the moon determines and dictates when we should be keeping our Sabbaths. So that means that the Sabbath then could fall upon any day of the week besides the seventh day, Saturday. In Ezekiel 46 verse 1, we find that we have the 6 working days mentioned. We also have the Sabbath day and also the new moon. So 3 classes of divisions. Now we know what the 6 days are and the Sabbath, but what about the new moon? In Psalms 104 verse 19, the Bible tells us that the moons were appointed for seasons. Okay, so what are these seasons that the moon was appointed for? Psalm 81 verse 3 tells us here, blow up the trumpet in the new moon in the time appointed on our solemn feast day. So the new moon is connected with the time appointed or the seasons of the solemn feast day. So the moons determine the feast days, but not the weekly seventh day Sabbath. Notice in Leviticus chapter 23 verses 1 through 8 that you have the 7-day Sabbath being the Sabbath of the Lord, but then we also have the feast days, the Passover, the unleavened bread, the feast of first fruits. And then the Bible also tells us that all of these feast days were to be kept besides the Sabbaths of the Lord, making a distinction, and that these feast day Sabbaths would fall on the first day, on the 8th day, and on the 15th day. Now this was dictated by the moon. And of course, we find that when we look in Isaiah chapter 1, verse number 13 to 14, it says, bring no more vain oblations. Incense is an abomination unto me. The new moons and Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies, I cannot away with it. It is iniquity, even the solemn meeting. Your new moons and your appointed feasts, my soul hateth. They are a trouble unto me. I am weary to bear them. Now we know that the 7-day Sabbath, which was instituted at creation, there was no sin or iniquity or transgression, so God can't be talking about the 7-day Sabbath. But these feast days and these solemn feasts, the time appointed, the new moons, he says, I cannot away with it. It is iniquity. Bring no more vain oblations and incense. It's an abomination unto me. And so we find that these ceremonial Sabbaths were something that God can no longer tolerate. Hosea chapter 2 verse 10 through 11 says, and now will I discover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and none shall deliver her out of my hand. I will also cause all her mirth to cease, her feast days, her new moons, and her Sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts. So God was going to cause to cease the ceremonial Sabbaths, the feast days. This terminated at the cross when Jesus died on Friday, which by the way was a high Sabbath, because anytime the feast day Sabbath and the regular weekly 7-day Sabbath came together, it was a high day. Then Jesus rested in the tomb on Saturday, and then he raised from the dead on Sunday, the first day of the week. This is the gospel account in Luke chapter 23 and also chapter 24. Now the Israelites, before they were given these ceremonial Sabbaths, these feast days, which were appointed by the moon, they had understanding of the Sabbath of the 7th day before this. You remember in Exodus chapter 16 when God tested them according to the manna to see whether or not they would walk in his law, and they were told to gather manna every day, and on the 6th day gather a double portion, because on the 7th day there would be none. Well, there were some that didn't believe God, and they went on the 7th day and they didn't find any manna. And then God said, how long do you refuse to walk in my laws and not to keep them? God has given you the Sabbath. On the 6th day, go and gather the manna, but on the 7th day, you need to abide in your house. Don't let anybody go out into the field. And then the people rested on the 7th day. This is what we read about in Exodus 16, verse 4, and also verses 25 to 30. So Sabbath, as far as the seventh day, was already instituted before Leviticus 23 was written. Genesis chapter 2, verse 1 through 3 speaks about how God sanctified the seventh day. He hallowed it, he blessed it, he rested on that day. It was set apart for holy purposes. And in Genesis chapter 1, we find that the Sabbath day was to come on the seventh day, but which day was the moon made on? On the fourth day. So the moon, as well as the sun and stars, the fourth day. And then we have also the seventh day the seventh day dealing with the Sabbath. So we find that the moon has no bearing on the Sabbath. It's creation. The Creator set it up this way. The moon does not tell us or guide us as to when we should keep the seventh day. It does talk about the phases of the new month and the ceremonial Sabbaths that are connected with it, but not indeed the weekly Sabbath. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 23, we read this verse, "And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof." Revelation 21, 23. So notice that we're going to be keeping the Sabbath in heaven, but there's not going to be any moon to tell us when to keep it. So if we really needed the moon to dictate to us or to give us instruction as to when to keep the Sabbath, then we're going to be in trouble. But we know that there's still going to be some type of monthly cycle, because in Revelation 22, verse 2, it says, "In the midst of the street of it, on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruit, and yielded her fruit every month." So we find that there's still going to be cycles and phases of different months, but no moon. In Isaiah 66, verse 22 and 23, we find, "For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, or from one new month to another, and from one Sabbath to another, week to week, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord." So once again, we find that the moon was appointed for the feast days, the solemn feast days, which were ceremonial Sabbaths, which pointed to the work of the plan of redemption accomplished by Jesus Christ. The Sabbath was to be worshipped from sunset to sunset. Now, we have to be careful, because if we're going to follow the lunar solar calendar, then we're going to have to keep all the feast days. And if we do that, then we make of none effect the everlasting gospel. We make none effect of what Jesus Christ has accomplished on Calvary, and we open ourselves up to all types of winds and doctrine that will shake us and blow us off of the eternal platform of truth. Well, I pray that your question has been answered by these verses that we've shared with you this evening, and as always, that your eyes have been enlightened as you've tasted a little of this honey.